op-ed piece that has been making waves over the weekend. You've probably seen it on your timeline. Luckily for us, the author is our very own Swaminathan Aiyar, who has claimed that the Lok Sabha election results raise serious questions over the theory that India is going through a crisis in the agricultural sector. The premise is, with BJP's vote shares increasing even in rural areas, were farmers not really as unhappy as they seemed? Speaking to us on this today is Swaminathan Iyer, consulting editor at ET Now. We're also joined by Avik Saha, convener of Jai Kisan Andolan and founding member of Swaraj India, who will perhaps counter that view. Welcome to both of you. Swami, let me begin by allowing you to set the premise of your piece, which was a fascinating one, was the talk of social media over the weekend, and basically said that if things were so bad, the BJP would have not done so well, especially in rural areas. Am I summing it up correctly?
That is absolutely correct. In fact, there are two strands of evidence. One is, if rural voters are so enthusiastic that 46% of them vote for BJP and only 23% for Congress and others, very clearly the rural areas do not regard the BJP as having brought about an agrarian crisis. Secondly, if you actually take a look at agricultural GDP in this 2018-2019, it is up by 2.9%. Now, 2.9% is as good as the long-term average. And it is a remarkable testimony to the fact that partly the spread of irrigation and partly diversification of agriculture away from crops to other things like animal husbandry, fisheries, trees, dairying, all of this has made it more monsoon-proof than before. Now, what is very clear from the data is that the first 2 quarters, there was a very good Rabi and summer crop, which had a growth of almost 5–6%, and then followed by a drought in the monsoon, ending up in minus 0.1% in the final quarter. Right? So things got worse because of the drought, but because of the good earlier performance, to have 2.9% is a very reasonable agricultural performance. To call that an agrarian crisis is silly. I mean, in the old days, there used to be minus 5%, minus 10%, but plus 2.9% is a very reasonable performance. It is not remotely what can be called a crisis.
Let me get Avik Saha in. Avik, the logic is fairly simple. If there was such a huge rural distress and crisis in the agricultural sector, then there is no way the BJP would have won so handsomely.
That's the point I'm trying to make. The BJP's victory and its correlation to the farm crisis is an incorrect way of thinking. If there was no joblessness in the country, if there was no unemployment in the country, would the BJP have won? Again, the answer is the unemployed youth have voted for BJP. See, the voters vote for a large number of reasons. In spite of the crisis, it is my belief, again, it's my belief only, that the farmers this time voted saying that, all right, farmers have crisis, but this is a vote about the nation. So nation first. I don't think we should correlate the farmers' vote with the crisis at all, because the indicators of the crisis are all across the place. I mean, if you don't like the word crisis, you can use some other word, but there is no getting away from it. The government doesn't want to get away from it. The government is trying very hard to deal with the issues of the crisis, and we who do not actually suffer the crisis, for us to say that, oh, there is no crisis, it should be scaled down, these are unfair. You see, look at the sugarcane dues. 20,000 rupees is owed to the farmers. They have not got it.
Let me get a response. No, I get your point, Avik Saha. Let me get a response from Swami on that. On the part about, and let me take PM Kisan scheme as an example of what Avik is trying to say. If there is no crisis, why the PM Kisan scheme, and why is one of the first big decisions that this government has made in its first cabinet meet an extension of the PM Kisan scheme to all farmers?
Okay, you may say that why is this? The answer is that if it was really a crisis, surely there would have been a bigger response before the election. I mean, you don't respond after the election. I mean, surely he's not suggesting that the crisis arose during the campaign. The crisis that we talk about has been talked for over 1 year. So yes, there were some efforts. There was the PM Kisan thing of 6,000 rupees a month. Nothing wrong with that, because there was a major drought. When there is a drought, this is a short-term pain, and it's part of the agricultural cycle. So when there is a drought, you have things like relief works, you have things like drought relief, and in this particular case, cash transfer. It's all part of the saying, okay, we've had a bad drought, there has to be some short-term relief. This is not to be confused with the word crisis. I find the agrarian crisis has been used for almost 10 years. So if all that you're saying is, do you know there was a drought and there was a setback pain? Of course there was. But that's just a drought. There is a long-term problem. The long-term problem is that, agriculture is only 13% of GDP, and yet 47% of the workforce was there. The consequence is that the average plot of a farm is only 1 to 2 acres. Now, on such tiny plots, can you ensure rising prosperity? Obviously not. So very, very clearly, you can't fiddle around with prices here or a transfer there to solve the problem. You have to get people massively out of agriculture into industry and services. If 2/3 of the people are shifted, then the average size of a farm can triple. That will get you closer to some kind of solution. So first you need to get people out. The second issue that you have to tackle is that even in the past, crisis very often meant that there was a shortage of production. And you said, say, okay, let me give higher prices. The current problem is one of excess production in area after area, with the result that prices have been coming down. A crisis of excess production should not be solved by trying to make prices even higher. The moment you do that, the question is, okay, if there's no demand for this product in India, can you export it? Yes, provided the price is lower than the world price. But if you have very, very high minimum support prices, which raise it above the world price, that agricultural surplus cannot be sold abroad, cannot be sold in India. You will get to the kind of position that the European Economic Community was in the 1980s, where because of high support prices, you got mountains of beef, mountains of grain, mountains of butter, and lakes of milk, none of which could be sold, and ultimately they dumped it at throwaway prices on their main enemy, the Soviet Union. So ever since then, Europe and America, they have been moving away from high farm prices to direct farmer support. We need to do the same. The Swaminathan committee formula is absolutely the wrong thing to do, or 50% above your costs. For heaven's sake, this does not take any account of whether it's economic or not. So I would say that we should need to go back to the old formula where the Commission on Agricultural Prices also took into account international prices when trying to set the prices of various crops. So that if there is additional production, it must be exportable. Meanwhile, you can have cash support to farmers like PM Kisan until such time as they are moved out into industry and services.
Okay, Avik Saha, let me come in and let me just underline this with one more point that Swami makes in his piece, that in the state of Maharashtra, for example, where there was the worst conditions of drought, where there were high suicide numbers as well, though that's not what he says, but there were high farmer suicide numbers as well, but the NDA wins 41 out of 48 seats. Can you still say there's no correlation between the two?
There could be multiple reasons, as I've said before. Perhaps Vanchit Bahujan Aghadi's entry into the electoral field may have played a role. There were some articles on this, 7 to 8 seats may have got affected. But finally, I think we should all stand up and salute the farmer once again, that this time around, keeping their sectoral interests in abeyance, they voted for the country as Mr. Modi had asked them to vote. I don't think we should punish them for it, and we should suddenly turn around and say, since you voted for Mr. Modi, now we thereby declare that there is no crisis in your sector. The crisis is apparent and palpable. The crisis is in not getting prices. The crisis is doubling of the indebtedness of rural households. And let's forget once the farmers who have land and produce something. There has been a huge drop in real income of agricultural labor in the rural sector. All these indicate crisis. Wages are falling, prices are falling, debt is increasing, suicide is perhaps rising because you won't show it, you're hiding it. Therefore, I presume there's something terrible there, terrible enough for you to want to hide. And after all this is presented in front of us, we turn around and say, because they voted for Mr. Modi, they don't have a crisis. They voted for Mr. Modi because Mr. Modi was successful in convincing the nation that yes, as a nation, we should stand together in this time of crisis, as he described it and as he promoted it.
Okay.
That is the beginning and the end of this debate. The crisis is very much so. If you don't like the word crisis, you can call the farm sector devastation or whatever you want to call it. But the point is, if you go to rural areas, you will see the crisis with your own eyes. Don't penalize them for having voted for you. Try and work for them. And I think this government
let me get Swami in on that point. I think Swami,
it is trying to come out with pro-farmer
the protest is coming from the conflation of the election results with the state in the agricultural sector. A few days ago, Yogendra Yadav on this show said that maybe farmers voted as Hindus first, or they voted in response to, you know, the Balakot attacks and not really to the problems they had in their own homes.
As I said, even if you get away from, in the first place, you know, that you're changing the tactic. If the man is merely saying there's pain because of a drought, of course there is. If you say there's a long-term structural problem because the plots have got very small, we all know that. Why use the word crisis for something which has been coming for a long, long time, and it means you have to get people out. But even there, you say things are very bad. Oh, really? Then how is it that every single consumer goods company is going and selling more and more in rural areas? They all tell you that the boom market is the rural areas. I recently did a research project in Gujarat, comparing resettled people from the Sardar Sarovar with people who are still in the forest. Believe me, even of the people in the forest, 31% had motorcycles, 57% had cell phones, and 74% had bank accounts. And you tell me this is a huge crisis. This is still in a tribal area. Please, everywhere that you look, motorcycles are rising, cell phones are rising, bank accounts are rising. I passed through an election through the small towns. A sign of prosperity is, do you see reddies full of fruit? This is because fruit is expensive and perishable. If you see lots of them, it means purchasing power is there. You please ask all the consumer goods companies, they will tell you the rural market in the last 10 years has really boomed and kept them afloat. And something like two-wheelers cannot be bought in increasing quantities in a place that is completely in crisis. So, you know, there are structural problems, there no doubt. There is individual pain for everybody whose crop has got lost because of drought or because there is a pest. But this is part of agriculture. A crisis has to be something dramatically different from the norm. And I'm afraid droughts are things that happen. So I would simply say that if you look at rural incomes, they have risen so much that it's become a boom for consumer people, for consumer goods. And to call this a crisis, I mean, I think the vocabulary, English vocabulary has disappeared.
Saha, quick response.
40% of the area has received a deficit pre-monsoon rainfall. There is drought. Yet those in the drought areas voted for BJP. So are we to understand that there is no drought? The PM Fasal Bima Yojana has not worked. The government has admitted it. Drought has resulted in crop loss and farmers have not got their prices and have not been compensated. Shouldn't that lead to a crisis? The indebtedness, are we not to believe NABARD's financial inclusion survey, which shows that between 2013 to 2018, rural indebtedness has grown from 47,000 rupees per household to 1,04,000 rupees per household? So just because people are borrowing more, maybe have a son or a daughter working in the city and are able to buy things in the village, that proves that the rural India is doing great. Everything else works, everything else shows that it's the other way around.
So he didn't say great. He doesn't say great.
Everything, every single indicator.
Swami doesn't say great. He doesn't like the word crisis. You say, okay, if not crisis, then it's devastation. It may seem like we're nitpicking, but it's truly a very nuanced, fascinating debate. Unfortunately, I've run out of time, but I think it is a debate which will continue through the days to come. Has the Lok Sabha election raised a question on the rural crisis, or did farmers forget about the rural crisis when they were voting? The verdict is still out. Thank you so much for joining us this evening on the India Development Debate.